The bullies don't know the shy girl. Torment is training to be a martial arts expert. In the quiet hallways of a suburban high school, the sound of laughter echoes like a cruel reminder of Emma's everyday torment. Emma, a shy 16-year-old girl with auburn hair and emerald green eyes, has mastered the art of staying invisible. But even invisibility can't shield her from the bullies who see her as an easy target. Emma lives in a bustling neighborhood with her mother, Sarah, a hard-working hairdresser who always reminds Emma to stand up for herself. "You're stronger than you think," Sarah often says. But Emma doesn't feel strong. In her mind, the world is a cruel, unforgiving place. However, fate has a different plan for her. This is the story of how a timid girl finds her inner strength and becomes someone no one expected. It was a sunny afternoon at the neighborhood park, a lively place filled with the sounds of basketball games and teenagers chatting on picnic benches. Emma sat quietly on a worn-out bench, sketching in her notebook. She loved to draw. It was her way of escaping the harsh reality of school, but her solitude was shattered by the sound of mocking laughter. "Look who we have here, the Queen of Awkwardness." Madison's voice rang out, sharp and cruel. Madison, the school's queen bee, strutted toward Emma with her clique trailing behind her. Emma froze, gripping her pencil tightly. Before she could react, Madison snatched her notebook. "What's this?" "Oh, look, it's terrible, just like you," Madison sneered, flipping through the pages. Her friends erupted in laughter. Emma's face flushed with embarrassment as she reached for the notebook. But Madison tossed it to one of her friends, who flung it into the dirt. Emma's pencils and papers scattered across the ground. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as Madison leaned in, her voice dripping with mockery. "You're pathetic, you know that?" Unable to respond, Emma turned and ran. Her chest heaved with a mix of anger and shame as she sought refuge in a deserted alleyway. Slumping against the wall, she buried her face in her hands. "Why does this always happen to me?" she whispered. The sun was setting as Emma wandered aimlessly through the streets, her feet leading her far from the park and the laughter that still echoed in her mind. She wiped her tear-streaked face and tried to steady her breathing. That's when she saw it. Tucked between two rundown buildings was a small, nondescript storefront. A wooden sign above the door read, "Dojo Yamada, Traditional Martial Arts." Curiosity drew Emma closer. She peered through the dusty window and saw an older woman moving gracefully across a polished wooden floor. Her movements were mesmerizing, each one a blend of precision and power. The woman looked up, her piercing gaze meeting Emma's through the glass. She smiled gently and gestured for Emma to come inside. Hesitant, Emma opened the door, the faint sound of a bell announcing her arrival. I didn't mean to bother you," Emma stammered, her voice barely audible. "You're not bothering me at all," the woman replied, her voice warm and steady. "I'm Mrs. Yamada. And you are?" "Emma," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Mrs. Yamada studied Emma carefully, noticing the slumped shoulders, the nervous fidgeting. "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves," she said softly. "Would you like to learn how to win those battles?" Emma blinked, unsure of what to say. She had no idea why she felt comforted by this stranger, but something about Mrs. Yamada's presence was reassuring. "I don't think I can," Emma whispered. Mrs. Yamada tilted her head. "Let me teach you something. Strength is not about overpowering others. It's about finding balance, inside and out." There was a long pause before Emma finally nodded. "Okay, I'll try." Mrs. Yamada smiled. "Good. The first step is showing up, and you've already done that." The dojo became Emma's sanctuary. Each day after school, she would step into the quiet space, leaving behind the jeers and whispers of her classmates. At first, everything felt foreign: the rigid stances, the disciplined routines, and the intensity of Mrs. Yamada's instructions. Feet shoulder width apart, Mrs. Yamada instructed one afternoon. Your balance is your foundation. Without it, you'll fall before the fight even begins. Emma wobbled as she tried to mimic the stance. Her arms felt awkward, her legs stiff. I'm terrible at this, she muttered. Mrs. Yamada stopped and knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on Emma's shoulder. Every master was once a beginner, she said. The only failure is giving up. Those words stayed with Emma. Over weeks, her movements became sharper, her stances more stable. She learned how to block, strike, and move with purpose. But the training wasn't just physical. Mrs. Yamada taught her breathing techniques to calm her mind and encouraged her to confront her fears. Close your eyes, Mrs. Yamada said one evening. What do you see? Emma hesitated. I see Madison. And everyone laughing at me. Now, Mrs. Yamada said firmly, breathe. Imagine the laughter fading, replaced by silence. Imagine standing tall, strong. Can you see it? Emma nodded, her breath steadying. Slowly, the lessons began to seep into her everyday life. At school, she started walking with her head held high. When Madison's clique hurled insults, Emma didn't flinch. Her classmates began to notice the change. She wasn't the same shy, trembling girl anymore. One afternoon at the dojo, Mrs. Yamada watched as Emma executed a near-perfect sequence of moves. You're not just learning to fight, Emma, she said. You're learning who you are. Emma smiled, the first real smile she'd worn in a long time. For the first time, she felt like she was more than the girl who hid in the shadows. The annual community festival was in full swing at the park. Booths lined the pathways, children laughed as they played games, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. Emma walked through the crowd with newfound confidence, her posture upright, her steps steady. She was accompanied by two new friends from the dojo who chatted excitedly about the festival. But peace was short-lived. From across the park, Madison spotted Emma. With her ever-present entourage by her side, she made a beeline for her target. Well, well, Madison sneered, stopping directly in front of Emma. If it isn't our little wallflower, finally decided to crawl out of your hole. Emma's friends tensed, ready to intervene, but Emma raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. Her heart raced, but she steadied her breath, just as Mrs. Yamada had taught her. I'm not here to fight with you, Madison, Emma said calmly. Madison smirked, clearly enjoying the attention of the growing crowd. Oh, really? Because you've been acting all high and mighty lately. Guess you think you're better than me now, huh? Emma shook her head. I don't think I'm better than anyone, but I'm not going to let you intimidate me anymore. The crowd murmured, intrigued by Emma's composure. Madison stepped closer, her voice dripping with mockery. Big words for such a little mouse. What are you gonna do? Cry? Emma's hands twitched at her sides, but she stayed grounded. When Madison reached out to shove her, Emma sidestepped gracefully, avoiding the push entirely. The movement was so smooth, so precise, it left Madison stumbling slightly. The crowd gasped, and Madison's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. What was that? You think you're some kind of ninja now? Emma locked eyes with her, her voice steady and strong. Strength isn't about pushing people down, Madison. It's about lifting yourself up. You should try it sometime. For a moment, Madison was speechless. The crowd that had once laughed at Emma now stared in awe. Slowly, murmurs of admiration began to ripple through the group. Madison, visibly flustered, muttered something under her breath and stormed off, her entourage trailing behind her. Emma stood still, her breathing controlled, her mind clear. The weight of years of humiliation seemed to lift as the crowd began to clap. Some even approached her, offering words of encouragement. Her friends from the dojo walked up to her, grinning. That was incredible, one of them said. Emma smiled softly. For the first time, she felt truly free. The confrontation with Madison became the talk of the school and the neighborhood. Word spread quickly. Emma, the shy girl who had once been the target of relentless bullying, had stood up to the most feared girl in school without throwing a single punch. For Emma, it wasn't about the recognition. It was about the quiet strength she had discovered within herself, but the ripple effects of her actions were undeniable. One by one, classmates who had once been bystanders began to approach her. Some apologized for not standing up for her in the past. Others asked her about the dojo and whether they could learn to be as confident as she had become. Even Madison's clique started to fracture. Without her usual aura of intimidation, Madison found herself isolated, and for the first time, she began to reflect on her behavior. After a few days, she approached Emma hesitantly in the hallway. "Hey," Madison said awkwardly, her usual bravado nowhere to be found. Emma turned, surprised. "What do you want, Madison?" I wanted to say I'm sorry," Madison admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why I treated you the way I did. It wasn't right." Emma studied her for a moment, seeing vulnerability where there had once been cruelty. "It's not easy to apologize," Emma said, "but words aren't enough. If you're really sorry, prove it by treating people better." Madison nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'll try." That evening at the dojo, Mrs. Yamada noticed something different in Emma's movements. "You're lighter on your feet today," she said with a knowing smile. Emma nodded. "It feels like I've let go of something heavy." As the weeks went on, the dojo became a hub for local teens who wanted to learn more than just martial arts. They came seeking guidance, discipline, and the confidence Emma radiated. Mrs. Yamada welcomed them with open arms, happy to see her teachings inspire a new generation. Emma became a mentor of sorts, helping newcomers with the basics and sharing her own journey. It was strange but fulfilling to see how much had changed since the day she first walked through the dojo's doors, lost and broken. But Emma's journey wasn't over yet. One quiet evening at the dojo, Mrs. Yamada approached Emma with a piece of paper in her hand. "This arrived today," she said, handing it to Emma. Emma unfolded it and read the bold text at the top. "Local martial arts tournament, open to all ages and skill levels." Her stomach fluttered with nerves. "You think I'm ready for this?" Mrs. Yamada smiled. "You've already faced tougher challenges, Emma. This is just a new opportunity to show yourself how far you've come." Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll do it." As the weeks passed, Emma trained harder than ever. The tournament wasn't about winning. It was about pushing her limits, about continuing the journey she had started. On the morning of the tournament, as she tied her belt and prepared to step onto the mat, she looked at herself in the mirror. The timid girl who had once flinched at her own reflection was gone. In her place stood a confident young woman, ready to face whatever came her way. Emma's journey wasn't just about overcoming bullies. It was about discovering the strength that had always been inside her. She learned that true power doesn't come from fists or fear, but from self-belief and resilience. Her story inspired a neighborhood, challenged perceptions, and proved that even the quietest voices can become the strongest. What about you? Have you ever faced a challenge that changed your life? Share your story in the comments and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more inspiring tales.